Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Progressive Brothers Podcast. This is episode 78. I'm here with my co-host, Renaissance Man.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and peace to everyone in the chat.
Also, make sure you follow us on Twitter at Brothers_Podcasts. So, George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. A senator by the name of Tim Scott, who represents South Carolina, thinks that the bill needs to be reformed and that defunding the police is a bad slogan and branding or bad slogan to the brand of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. What's your take on this, Renaissance Man, so far?
I took it as, is the bill dead? Correct me if I'm wrong. Like, essentially, I took it as that, him and Cory Booker were essentially tasked with basically coming up with a bill to, basically a reconciliation of what they had, what the Democrats put forward versus, what Republicans' big hangups were things like qualified immunity. Defund the police was never something that was really tied to it. That's more of a local type of thing. This obviously dealt with more like more federal standards, use of force standards across a uniform standards database, basically prevent police officers from getting fired in one department and moving to the next one, reporting standards, things along those lines. My understanding is that basically, Tim Scott tried to frame it as, hey, basically, they were anti-police and that Cory Booker wasn't willing to compromise versus my understanding is Cory Booker kind of compromised on just about everything, and Tim Scott, basically wasn't willing to compromise at all. He at one point, I believe, Tim Scott said that the Fraternal Order of Police actually came out in support of him, and I think they reached out to him like, no, that they had support for the changes Booker was proposing. So and then I think he started referencing like other police orders. Basically he was kind of getting caught showing his hand of, hey, this didn't seem like it was ever a serious negotiations. His whole role, and I think this was to torpedo it, because I don't think Mitch McConnell and the Republican Party were really trying to negotiate in good faith. This is, in my opinion, what a lot of times what happens to a lot of Black Republicans is they kind of get put out there to do the dirty work or sort of used as a mascot, not to be taken too seriously. And I think, I believe George Floyd's brother, Felonious Floyd, I believe he came out and said, Tim Scott lied to his face, Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham. So he's taken a bashing lately in the media for at least the way he's trying to spend his role in this.
Yeah, so let me read what's on the 2021 bill. Work to end racial and religious profiling, save lives by banning chokeholds and no-knock warrants, limit military equipment on American streets and require body cameras, hold police accountable in court, investigate police misconduct, empower our communities to reimagine public safety in an equitable and just way, change the culture of law enforcement with training to build integrity and trust, improve transparency by collecting data on police misconduct and use of force, stop sexual assault and law enforcement custody. So I'm not sure where Tim Scott, has any real disagreements outside of supposedly their defunding, because this is coming straight from the Judiciary House.gov on the House's website. So I'm not seeing anything in there that he's complaining about from a media perspective that would coincide with what's in the bill. And so I don't know. Personally, I think that, this is a pretty straightforward bill, right? What is there to really disagree about other than the collecting of data, right? So the idea that if a police officer actually, I guess if he shoots somebody, kills somebody, injures somebody, that he can't be, that his name has to be put inside a database, this national database registry. I don't see what the problem is. If I get into a car accident that's on my record. Whether it's my fault or not, it's still on my driver's record that I was involved in the incident. In the state, and every state knows this because every insurance company is going to know this, and that will determine what my insurance rates are going to be. When it comes to law enforcement, though, it seems to be a lot of pushback in that area that makes it seem like, well, that's too intrusive. And I'm like, you guys know everything about us. Why don't we know anything about you? And you're a public servant. Where's the public trust?
Yeah, I think it just boils down to, like I said, Republicans were never really, in my opinion, ever going to sign up for a police reform bill. It's not in the party is just too pro-police. I mean, the police unions overwhelmingly back Trump. They're not going to really support anything that's going to really cut down on their funding or their power or, anything that's really going to hold them accountable from that standpoint. And, I think, like I said, I think this thing was a dog and pony show. I think it was mainly done because at the time, policing was a major issue. And I think politicians on both sides wanted to capitalize and at least pretend like they were trying to do something. And, I think even Republican leadership was too that they weren't even going to make the mistake of basically trying to come out against this at that time, just because they even realized, like, hey, it's too much of a lightning rod issue. It just had too much momentum. Too many corporations were jumping behind things, it was just damage control. So I think, the whole thing with Tim Scott was basically, hey, let's put him out there. Let's try to make it look like we made a good faith effort. And, essentially, have it fall apart before it really goes anywhere. That sort of seems to be his role right now. You think he's the one who gave the rebuttal to, I believe it's Joe Biden's speech, where he talked about there not being any racism in America and things like that. That's what he seems to be being used for right now. And I think it's damaging his credibility. It's damaging Black conservatives' credibility, because they always try to paint it as, hey, you can come to this side and racism is overblown. Democrats are really the party of racism, this and that, and things like this occur where it's like, you constantly take black eyes on behalf of the party, just doing crazy stuff. So,
yeah, I mean, the Republican Party, the conservative movement is supposed to be this big tent movement for everybody. But in reality, within their own tent, all of the Black conservatives always seem to be the piñata for, beating on politically. Whether it's Tim Scott, whether it's Larry Elder, John James, Vernon Jones, Michael Steele, Lieutenant Colonel West, Alan Keyes. You name these people and it's like, it doesn't really look all that great to be a Black conservative. What do you really get out of all of that at the end of the day if you're always shuffling your feet and tapping your shoes every time something critical comes around? What did Herman Cain get out of being a conservative other than COVID and early death? Same thing with Ben Carson, Dr. Ben Carson, the man who separated conjoined twins at the head, was only relegated to dealing with housing and urban development. You haven't heard from him since. I just find this interesting that Black conservatives are always at the forefront of obstructing progress, but then pretend that the left is the issue and that the George Floyd Justice and Police Act of 2020 and 2021 somehow is too problematic. And I'm like, have you looked in the mirror lately?
Yeah, it's like I said, I don't think that this was ever serious. It just is. It's one of those issues that unfortunately Dems don't have the votes to really pass. And I don't know where the barometer sort of moved, especially with the COVID and uptick in crime rates in some places. how much the appetite for it has gone across the board. I'm sure amongst progressives, large swaths of the Democratic base, it still has a lot of support, but the ability to get something bipartisan, I feel like unless Dems have the House in control of the Senate, unfortunately I don't think you're going to get something at the federal level, because I believe Cory Booker even put, I think initially he wanted to end qualified immunity, and I think he thought that he had initially from speaking, I think thought he had a chance at that, but I think at one point people were willing to take that off the table if they could get some other things, but at this point I don't even know if that's a possibility. Republicans you basically play the same card that they always do of, hey, high crime rates, rising crime rates, and look at Dems being soft on crime, so they may not want to touch this from the political standpoint, despite the fact that a report actually came out the other day showing how crime actually surged 30% under Trump as well, which him and the Republicans basically ran on the rhetoric that, hey, crime would go through the roof if Biden was elected, but yet and still it was surging on Trump's watch as well. So,
well, if to your point, on a federal level that might be really tough, but when it comes to the state level, we saw what Gavin Newsom did the other day, sweeping reforms that no other state has actually enacted at all within the 50 states combined. I think what he has done, he's taken the George Floyd policing act and has basically enacted it in his own state of California. Everything that they wanted in that bill, they got it just the other day. And so that's the power of local elections and state elections, that you get this sort of progress at the end of the day. It seems like other states will have no other choice but to comply at some level. I think you're going to start to see a lot more blue states start to pass. They're not going to get all 10, right? If you have a top 10 of the Floyd Policing Act, you're not going to get all 10, but you're going to get at least 3 or 4, and that's going to be good for re-election. And it's going to be something as simple as body cams, dash cams, no chokeholds, and no knock warrants. That's your 4 right there, and that's going to take you, at the ballot. If you have if you're in election season, that's going to take you to the ballot, and then that seals the deal. I think that a lot of blue states and a lot of your leftist politicians are going to be missing out big time by not enacting their own and adopting the framework for themselves.
Yeah, that's the power of statewide office. Living in a place where they have that sort of control at that level, you just, like I said, it's just going to be another thing that represents, once again, the growing divide between left versus right, blue versus red. Blue states with enacting reforms, red states basically doubling down on policies that definitely need reform and definitely are completely flawed. I still, like I said, unfortunately, still run into issues about collecting data on use of force standards, because I'm sure those red states are not going to want to report that data, as well as the database that will basically track, police misconduct across state lines, so people can't go from department to department getting fired and basically getting rehired.
But I mean, a simple background check would tell them, I mean, think about it from a regular job standpoint. This will be my last point. When you call, if you have a candidate that applies to a role, you do a reference check on them. I mean, how hard is it to find out that they did something? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the books. The media is going to report all of this. So a simple Google search is going to come up, first name, last name, and what state they came from. That's going to tell them everything, because the media is on top of a lot of this type of stuff from a Twitter standpoint, social media standpoint, right? It shouldn't be that difficult. I would, if it was me, I would probably work with the social media companies to actually catalog all of these events that happen and transpire and actually create a national database that way. Because a lot of these incidents that are happening in the last 10 years, just the last 10 years alone, that could easily be data mined and structured in a way that this is public record now because it's already out there.
Yeah. The only thing I think is that you run into issues where a lot of these guys, if it's something like in a smaller area where they don't necessarily may not have the reporting, or a lot of times some of these departments, these people will resign instead of being fired, and the reason won't be disclosed for that reason. I think you bump into a little bit of that versus if there's a requirement from federal law to disclose it. That really puts some teeth behind some of this stuff.
Yeah. How about we just don't hire him at all? If you came from one police department, I don't really want you in another one, man. I think that should be the rule of thumb. On last note, I did see in Philly that they're going to the HBCUs now to hire police officers. They're pulling talent from the HBCUs now, which I find to be very interesting. This is the first time I ever heard of a major metropolitan city, actually pulling talent from these areas in order to bolster up the numbers of black law enforcement officials.
Yeah, that is the first I've heard as well. I have heard of them going to career fairs and then talking about, hey, if you have a degree, it'll start you out at a higher pay band, things along those lines. It's an interesting perspective. I definitely think that there is definitely a need for more black police officers. I think that's one area where if people really want to see reform, you got to get more brothers stepping up to fill those roles and really try to purge the ranks of these far right wingers who have infiltrated these departments. I believe I saw something this weekend where someone hacked into, maybe it was like the New York State police. Maybe it wasn't their records, but it was some report that they hacked into. It basically exposed, the number of far right wingers that had actually infiltrated New York. I believe it's maybe NYPD law enforcement. So, to really get this problem under control, you're going to actually have to have people in there who have a vested interest to really go and weed this out, as well as really focus on things like community policing. And going back to Barack Obama and his 21st century community policing, those things were there. Obviously, were rolled back by the Trump administration. So obviously you're not going to get a Policing Reform Act, but it does sound like people are getting a little bit creative in how they go about solving some of these problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at brothers_podcast.